Today, I'm talking about a topic that is the most talked about, but in my opinion, least understood topic when it comes to human resources. I, I don't like talking about it, you guys, but we're talking about it today because it is a part of HR, and that is culture. I'm going to talk about culture and engagement, but I'm telling you, there are so many people who want to jump right into talking about culture. We're just we're doing leadership talks on culture. We want to be speakers on culture. We just want to talk about culture, 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 culture all the time. What's Google do? You know, if you're in the Midwest, what does Veterans United do? What are the companies that have the super fun cultures? And I would say, as a 20-year HR pro, I'm not having it and I'm not buying it. Culture is not the thing that I want to talk about. Now, there are some companies out there that I think that do talk about culture really, really well. So if you want to go there, there are those companies. If you've got the foundation built inside of your organization and you have trust in your organization and clarity and that business foundation built, which is the HR foundation, talk about culture. You have a culture, whether it's intentional or by default, you've got a culture. But jumping right in and talking about culture and having people in to do speaking engagements about culture, to me, is kind of laughable if you don't have the HR foundation built. So this is the reason why I'm doing this episode toward the tail end of this foundational HR series. I only have one more episode on this HR series, and it is about systems and tech. Okay, so we've talked about everything when it comes to what I call cradle to grave HR foundation. The HR foundations, we've talked about hiring and onboarding, the policies, the handbooks. We've talked about performance management, learning and development, time off and leave management. We've spun the gamut, compensation, benefits. We've went through it. Workforce planning, like we've done it, right? We've talked about manager training, all of the things, because to me, all of those things are the most. They're doing the most. They're building your culture. They are your culture. Do you have clarity in your organization? Do you have the foundations built? Is there trust because you have clarity and reliability and accountability? That is your culture. But I'm going to talk about culture as a standalone today and engagement because it is a topic that so many people want to hear about because it's in a lot of ways the fun part. The foundation, the hiring, the onboarding, the policies, the handbook, what you're responsible for as an employer. I'm telling you, no one really wants to talk to me about that, but they come to me because they have a cultural issue. And I ask first, do we have job descriptions? What's the posting look like? How are we onboarding these people? Do they have clear expectations? What about your policies and accountability? Like, do we have clarity there? Are we following the law? Are we protected from lawsuits? Most of the time, when we have a cultural issue and I bring it back to the foundation, I learned there's some major gaps in that area. That's why I do HR audits all the time, because people are like, oh, hard time recruiting and retaining. Can you tell me where to post my jobs better? And I'm like, and then there's companies that do job postings for people and all of that. If they aren't building these pieces, the foundational pieces, the beautiful job posting is going to bring in maybe cool people who get frustrated in your organization pretty dang quick because you don't have the foundation built. So the foundation is clutch. And then you've got the operational systems that we've talked about. This is where we live every single day, time off and leave management, compensation, performance, all of that, like disciplinary actions, things like that. That's where we end up living every day. And we have issues in those areas because the foundation isn't built. So we've got the foundations, we've got the operating systems, then we've got the strategic pieces. And culture and engagement fit in those strategic pieces. But these are the areas where people want to talk about leadership development, great like benefit strategies, perks, all of that stuff. But that's the strategic piece. You've got to have the foundation. You've got to hit the operational pieces, and then we get to the strategy. That's why I wrote 3 books. This was the first of the books, HR Easy Button. This is the practical guide to building the foundation. The operations systems one, it's still going to be called HR Easy Button, but it's going to be focused on the operating system pieces. That one's going to I'm saying it's going to be ready this year and sold this year. And then next year, we'll get into the strategic pieces. The third book will come out next year, but that's why I build them in order. It's not because I'm some lame rule follower. The reality is, if you don't know where the guidelines are, how in the Wild West are you expecting your employees to be so grateful about the happy hour when they feel like they're not paid adequately and there's favoritism in the workplace? I mean, that's just where I'm at. Culture is the most talked about and least understood concept in business, in my opinion. So, welcome back to another episode of Don't Waste the Chaos. I'm your host, Kerri Roberts. I've been doing this HR thing for over 20 years, and here's the reality of it. I didn't get into human resources because I think it's the end all be all. That's not it. Nothing to me was like, oh, human resources is a sexy field to get into. I just saw that people who were in human resources were making decisions. And where I was at the time, I felt like they were making wild decisions or not making decisions in a timely manner or not providing the clarity. And so, what I want to do to organizations that I partner with, but what I did when I worked in corporate for 20 years is just be clear. Just bring the clarity. Brene Brown says clarity is kind. And I mean, I totally agree with that. As a person who didn't know where she stood in a lot of areas, I am really passionate about bringing clarity. And you know what that actually is? It's psychological safety. So we want to talk about psychological safety in the workplace, but we don't really want to build the foundations in the operating system to get to the strategy. And so that's why we are jumping into this today. Culture is not what you say, it's what you do. That's the reality of it. And it's not only what you do, it's what you do with consistency, and it's what you do under pressure when things get really hard, because that's when those default operating systems fall in. So if we don't have those foundations built out, it's just going to get chaotic. And you know, the name of my show is Don't Waste the Chaos. When things get chaotic, I want to say, what are we missing? You know, what could we be improving on to help? Because this chaos doesn't come out of nowhere. There's a reason for it. So today we're going to talk about what culture actually is, how to measure engagement without a fancy survey platform, and then specific things that can build or destroy both culture and engagement. So don't forget to go back and listen to those foundational episodes. And if you don't subscribe to my show and you're catching this episode, just do that. I'm telling you, I am one of the most frank podcasts when it comes to businesses that you will ever hear. And I'm not going to talk about productivity hacks or like simple things. I'm going to talk about the foundations of business and how we get here, how HR metrics are business metrics and exactly what you should be measuring. I'm not the podcast that gives, there's so many podcasts that I've listened to that gives like the very, very high level, but then they want you to call to work with them to get the real details. I just lay it all out there every single episode because I want you to be helped by it. And you know what? If you decide that you don't have the time or you don't want to do the research to go all in and you need the help, then you call me, right? I'm top of mind. But what I don't want to do is give you just a little bitty smidge that you can't actually apply and then you don't get better, because we are not at a shortcoming of information. We can find the information. What we're not doing is applying it with consistency and with accountability. And so that's what I'm here for. That's why I show up every single week on a Tuesday. So subscribe to my show. I'd love it if you leave me a comment. I'd extra love it if you leave me a review. That helps other people find this data and this podcast that would be helpful to them. So with that, let's get into it. And we're going to start out with talking about what culture actually is. Culture is the sum of every decision that you make, every behavior that you tolerate, and every standard that you hold in your business, repeated over time until it becomes how we do things around here. You know, one of the things that I did, I was a director at a mortgage company. And one of the things I did on my team is I wrote out all of the unspoken rules of the team. And I am telling you, some people on my team were very uncomfortable with that. They didn't like that we documented all of the unspoken rules. And I even asked them, what are the unspoken rules of our department? I wrote a few down to help them. And it was like when a new hire came in, why would we want them to take 6 months to figure out how to operate here? I didn't understand. I wanted them to get up and running. So we say the hard thing. And sometimes the hard thing brings a little bit of conflict, but if you handle conflict well, that's a relationship builder, that's a trust builder, that provides clarity on how we're going to operate together. And so that is what culture is. Culture is how you're actually operating, not the shiny thing that you're putting outside, not the job description that shows that you are such a fun place to work, but you don't have any pay bands on there. It's probably because you live in ambiguity and you would like to underpay people or get a deal on a person to get them in, so you don't want to put the pay band out there. I know I'm poking the bear right now just a little bit, but that is a part of your culture. How you show up in the marketplace, how you show up as an employer, that's what your culture is. Culture is not your values poster, even though if you are living by your values, and I mean putting it on your job postings, your job descriptions, holding people accountable to it. It's part of your performance management system. It's what you hire and fire to. Your values are a part of your culture. Your values poster is pretty. And if you're not living by it, then it's pointless. So it's not your values, it's not your perks and your benefits. Those are like how you operate when it comes to how you pay people, but that's not your culture. It's not how you feel about your team. It's how your team feels about being there. So culture is how conflict is handled when it happens, because it's going to happen. You're going to have conflict. You've got these messy people. I have so many clients that come to me and say the hardest thing about their business is their people. And usually I learn pretty quickly that they don't have the foundation built. And so people are just filling in the blanks. We're humans. In the absence of information, we fill in information. And, we do it in a way that serves us in so many ways. So how is conflict handled when it happens? Whether feedback is given, whether feedback is safe to give, and whether it's received. Those all tell me things about your culture. Whether accountability is applied consistently or selectively. That tells me some things about your culture. How new people are welcomed and integrated. If you have an onboarding program, and I'm not talking about the module on your HR payroll software, even though that's very important, and I love that you've automated it. Onboarding takes about 90 days. So what your onboarding program looks like, what behaviors get rewarded, both formally and informally, and then what happens when somebody makes a mistake. That tells me right there what your culture is at your organization. That's your culture. And so many times we want to talk about culture as far as like the fun events that we hold. That's a part of it. Employee reward and recognition is a part of it, but that is not your culture in its entirety. There are 3 culture killers that I see in most small businesses when I'm interacting with them. The number one thing that I see come across my desk, I'd say these are really, really close to each other. It was hard for me to say one was higher than the other, but I ranked them in order based off of what I see most frequently when it comes to culture killers. The first one is favoritism. And you're probably thinking like, I absolutely do not play favorites. And I'm not talking about you spend more time from a friendship level with this person than this person. I'm talking about different rules for different people. And you might not even think that that's formally happening, but this destroys trust faster than anything else that I've seen. And what I'm talking about is I'd recommend you go back and listen to my leave management episode and also my one on leadership development, which talks about managers and how they're applying things. You could go into my handbook and policy episode as well. But what I'm talking about is, let's say, for example, a manager, one who's a little more flexible, maybe one who's a little more secure, or one who's a little more lax. It just depends on their personality. And they say yes a lot more often, whether that's to yes to time off, or whether that's to yes to flexibility, like working at home when your kid's sick or whatever it is. You've got a manager doing that. And then you've got another manager who's more of a no person. Maybe it's because they're by the book. Maybe it's because you don't have a policy for that. Maybe they don't have clarity, so they feel like they can't say yes to something because they're trying to follow the policy. Or maybe it's because they don't trust their people and they're insecure. A lot of reasons why we act the way that we do as managers and the way that we show up and the crap that we bring into the workplace. But that's what I'm talking about when it comes to favoritism, is different rules or lack of rules applied for different people. That's favoritism. That's a culture killer. Period. People will start to think that you like other people better. And it's literally just because they asked sometimes, or because the manager is more flexible, whatever. Second one is silent. And I'll tell you what, I'm the first person to say I get so irritated on social media when people are like, oh, you don't support this cause. Silence is violence. That is annoying to me. We can't all speak about everything at all times. So I'm not talking about like what you use your social media platform for and, like whether or not you support this movement or that movement or political. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about leaders who don't communicate. They leave vacuums that get filled usually with rumors or gossip or anxiety. So silence is a huge issue. And I have some owners that I work with, company owners, that will say, well, we don't like to spell all of that out because we want the flexibility to bless our people. Well, what happens is you end up blessing the squeaky wheels, and then the people who are like consistent worker bees, they don't get blessed with those things because they see that as taking advantage of you as an employer, or they just don't ask because they're here to work and leave and they don't need to bring their personal issues or whatever it is, whatever their reason. And so your silence causes major problems, and it gets filled, like I said, with gossip, rumors, lack of trust, anxiety, things like that. So communicate as much as you possibly can. That's a culture killer when you don't communicate. You don't communicate with consistency. You don't communicate to everyone. You communicate to this employee because you're closer to them, or they're easier for you to work with, or they're just in your office more because they're annoying. I don't know the reason why, but then that person has more information and then they're communicating their perspective of it to the team. And now before you know it, your silence is killing people. Okay, third culture killer that I see come up in small businesses a ton is a tolerance of toxic behavior because we don't have the foundations built and it's hard for us to hire. We're doing HR off the corner of our desk or recruitment, talent acquisition, whatever you want to call it. And so it's hard. We don't want to go through that process again. And then we also have some struggles with retaining. And when we lose a person because we don't have clear delineated duties, we've got people who are jacks of all trade. We don't know who's doing what. So it's really hard to replace them. We're kind of held hostage by our employees. So we tolerate some toxic behaviors. I see it often. And that is a culture killer. One person who treats other people poorly and gets faced with consequences versus another person who treats people poorly and faces no consequences tells your whole team what you really value or who you really value. Could come across as discrimination. Culture killers. So favoritism, silence, and tolerance of toxic behavior. Every time you behave or tolerate a behavior that violates your stated values, if you have them, you're teaching your team that the values are decorative. They're just for pretty on the wall every single time. So those are our culture killers. Google spent 2 years, I was looking at some data, studying what makes teams effective. And the single biggest predictor was not talent, experience, or compensation. It was psychological safety. And that might sound like a total woo-woo, like pie in the sky concept, but whether people felt safe to speak up, whether they felt safe to take risks, whether they could make mistakes without punishment, that's psychological safety. I think we think about like some therapy type things. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about here. I'm just talking about like, can they bring their full self to work? What happens if they drop the ball? Can they give you their feedback without you getting upset and taking it personal? That's psychological safety. And I'm talking about Google here. They have a cool campus. They've got cool perks. And what they found was psychological safety is the biggest factor when it comes to healthy culture. Not ping pong tables, goodness sakes alive. Here's what happens. Here's what I've seen happen. If you have ping pong tables and hacky sacks and things like that, what happens is some people will take advantage of it too far and waste time. Some people will take advantage of it appropriately and it's blowing off steam. Some people won't take advantage of it and they don't care. Other people won't take advantage of it and they will judge people who do take advantage of it. And you've just created all kinds of drama. So maybe just focus on like giving people fulfilling work assignments and making sure they're attached to the mission and not worry as much about fun and games. Fun and games will come. Let people be friends. So here's what psychological safety looks like in a small business. Employees bring problems to you before a crisis happens. They let you know they're having an issue with a client before the client calls you to tell you that they can't stand working with your employee because they know it's safe. They know they can bring it to you. So before the crisis happens, that's psychological safety. That's when you know you've got a safe work environment. People disagree in meetings, and that's okay. Versus they agree in meetings and then they talk about it privately and you find out that they agreed with something but they don't actually really agree with it. They just talked about it behind your back. That's because they were afraid to disagree with you in a public setting. Another way you can tell that you've got a psychologically safe culture is that mistakes are openly discussed. You know, here's an area where we struggled. Here's what we're doing with it. What happened, what we learned, what we're changing. If we don't talk openly about our mistakes, we're probably not a healthy culture in that way. And then new ideas are heard, even if maybe they're a little impractical. We let people dream. And I would say I'm a really black and white person. So early in my career, I had a hard time hearing ideas. I wanted to be like, okay, that's your idea. We immediately need to decide if it's viable or not, or we need to quit talking about it. You need to designate times where you can dream. If you've got a personality like mine that like struggles with that, you need to designate times because you want to get ideas from your people who are actually doing the work. Those are the indicators. Employees bring problems to you before a crisis arrives. They can disagree, they can bring their ideas, and they can talk about mistakes openly. Those are good indicators of psychological safety in a small business. Here's what this doesn't mean though. It doesn't mean that there's no accountability. Okay. That's actually a poor culture. You can have high safety and high standards. That's perfectly fine. It does not mean everybody gets along all the time. People who are scared of conflict probably is a childhood wound, but it does not mean that we're not safe psychologically if we're not getting along. Like, we're different people, we're not going to get along. Don't you fight with your spouse and your kids, but you love them endlessly, unconditionally. But like, sometimes you're going to disagree. Totally normal. Healthy conflict is a sign of safety, as a matter of fact. It's not a problem. And then the leader is always agreeable. No, that's not what this means. The leader is not always agreeable. Candor is a part of safety too. Being able to say, like, I hear you on that. Let me explain, the company's perspective on it and why we haven't gone down that path, but maybe we'll give it a shot. So the leader does not always have to be agreeable. Here is how you build this. And you're probably thinking this episode is supposed to be on culture, which you think are perks and benefits and fun and games. And now here we are talking about psychological safety. Hey, Google said it. Google did the research, but I'm thrilled. Like, when I was doing my research for this episode, I was thrilled to find that study because I just didn't really want to talk about the other piece because I have not seen that play its way out. When you start trying to do the fun parts of culture, but you don't have trust built, people are so annoyed. One of the things that I said a few episodes ago, I talked about a story of an organization that a person was like, hey, you can keep your free t-shirts. Why don't you just pay me more? Obviously, trust wasn't built in that organization. They didn't trust how funds were allocated, and they didn't feel like they were adequately paid. Now, does anybody ever say, like, I'm paid enough for my role? I actually had a client the other day that said, well, people who have stayed, when we paid them in the 10th percentile, obviously they're getting paid enough in their role. That's a whole other conversation, but that is not the fun things that we do. If we don't have the foundation built, it actually hurts our organization more than it helps. So how do you build psychological safety, therefore a healthy culture in your organization? The first thing you do as a senior leader, HR pro, manager, whatever it is model it yourself. You make a mistake, admit it. Let people know. Be the first to make or to offer up that you made a mistake. Ask people for input on how to help things. Respond well when people bring you bad news. It's just like your child. If someone comes to you and says, like, a major ball was dropped and we're going to miss a deadline, or it's going to cost us $40,000 or whatever it is, how you respond in that moment dictates whether or not they're going to bring you a mistake again in the future. Same thing as your kiddos. Just think about that. Respond well when somebody brings you bad news. That's going to determine whether or not you hear the next piece of bad news. Separate the person from the problem. This is a big one to me. If you can both be on one side of the table and tackle the problem versus asking a person why they did that and making it personal, that's going to make it psychologically safe. The idea didn't work is much healthier than you failed at this project. Do you hear the way that sounds? Like, we had an idea, we put it into play, it didn't work. Versus we had an idea and you failed at delivering on it. Like, that's going to bring two very different emotions, responses, and then future. And then following through. Accountability is a huge piece of this. If you ask for input and then you ignore the input, you're actually causing major problems and people are going to stop giving it. When I talk about engagement, I talk a lot about surveying engagement. Do not survey for engagement if you are not going to discuss what you learned, the key themes, and then put an action plan in place to address those, and then communicate when you've addressed them, what your priorities are. Maybe you put together a team to work through that. Maybe it's your managers are talking about it at your once a month manager meeting or your quarterly meetings, whatever that looks like. But that is very important when you get feedback from your employees to actually apply it. So what actually moves the needle when it comes to your culture and your engagement? Gallup, if you haven't heard of Gallup, you're living under a rock in the business community. They have been tracking this data for years. They have been measuring engagement for decades and decades, and only about 30% at the current time of employees are actively engaged at work based on the data that they see. The rest are either just going through the motions or they're actively disengaged, which is danger zone. And the actively disengaged are the most expensive people in your organization. They are dragging it down. I had a guy say one time, I was listening to him talk, and he said, it's like when you think about engagement in that data, you've got, a couple people at the front and they're pedaling this bike as hard as they can. You've got a couple people in the middle who aren't pedaling at all, but they're along for the ride. And then you've got a couple people in the back and they're literally jamming on the brakes. Those are your actively disengaged people. You're going to crash. Like, the people in the front are going to get tired eventually. You're going to crash. So here are the 5 things that I've seen that most reliably drive engagement when it comes to small to mid-sized businesses. The first is one that I can't preach on enough, and that is clarity. People have to know what's expected. They have to know how they're doing, and they have to know where they stand. Clarity is huge. If you have people who are not clear on their roles, how their roles are measured, what success and failure look like, and where they stand in the organization, they are going to be dissatisfied in short order if they aren't already. Clarity. Number 1, most reliable driver of employee engagement. Number 2, autonomy. This is huge. They have ownership about how to do their work, not just what they do, but how they get to do it. And I know this is different based off of, is it a brand new college grad that's never done it before? They're going to take a little bit more direction. If they're, a support task expert, they're going to have a little bit more direction. If they're a subject matter professional, they're going to have a little bit less direction. If they're a manager, a little bit less, leadership, a little bit less. I mean, there's a tier system to this, but having autonomy over their work makes them feel like they, as a person, are more than just a number, and what they bring to the table matters. Who doesn't want to feel like that? That seems like a very obvious one, but I think we miss this one in organizations. So autonomy is a very reliable driver of engagement. Third one is connection. They feel like they're a part of the team, and they feel like they're a part of a mission that matters. And if you don't have clear objectives or business goals, and you're not a nonprofit, then what are they attaching themselves to? At a nonprofit, and the reason why I differentiate this is sometimes we'll work at a nonprofit because we believe so deeply in the mission. The organization could be really messy, but we care so deeply about battered women, disabled individuals, veterans, sharks, whatever it is. We care so deeply about that cause that we may stick around. If you are a for-profit business selling widgets, then you need to attach that individual to the objectives of the organization and the goals and help them to understand how they contribute to the goals. If you don't have that, then how in the world do you expect these people to be engaged in what it is that you're doing? Because you're commerce. And I'm not saying that commerce isn't important. You might have the most amazing shoe on the market. Tom's is a great example. Everybody was so bananas over Tom's for a while because it was 1 for 1, and that was a really cool mission. So making shoes, maybe something that people aren't as passionate about, but like the 1 for 1. And if you don't know about Tom's story, Blake Mykowski founded that company. There's books out there and tons of studies about him. But anyway, they gave a pair of shoes every time they sold a pair of shoes, gave shoes to individuals who didn't have shoes. So very cool mission to get a part of. But if you are just your regular run-of-the-mill Nike distributor, what are people passionate about there? How do they attach to the mission? So the third is connection. That's a reliable driver of engagement. They need to feel connected to their peers, connected to the leaders, connected to the mission that matters. Fourth is growth. They see a path forward, not a dead end. I was just doing a compensation data study for a client the other day, and when I was looking at benchmarking, I was like, okay, so we've got a really wide range for this role. I asked for the job description, and what I started to see is even people with the same titles had variance in their job description. And I was like, hey, let's have like a level 1, a level 2, a level 3 here, because then there's really clear criteria, clarity, that they can see how to get to the next level, and they see that there is the next level, a place that they can grow in the organization. And that's really beautiful. That keeps people around, and it's a driver of engagement. So growth is number 4. And number 5 is recognition. And I think when it comes to culture and engagement, we jump right to number 5. We want to talk about recognition, employee reward and recognition. That's a category that everyone wants to be attached to because those are the fun things that like the feel good stuff or whatever. But that's number 5 for me. But it goes deeper than what we're giving them. This is if they feel seen, if they feel valued, if they feel appreciated specifically, not generically, not like I love what everyone is doing right now. It's like, Sarah, you're knocking it out of the park on this client, and this is the feedback that I got and why, and here's the impact. So the 5 things that most reliably drive employee engagement are clarity, autonomy, connection, growth, and recognition. These are the areas that we need to focus on if we care about our culture and if we want to grow employee engagement. So just to reiterate, what are the things that don't drive employee engagement, or at least not reliably, not long-term? Ping pong tables and free food, nice to have, but it's never a substitute. Team building events, these are meaningful only if the team already trusts each other. Who wants to hang out with people they don't like and they don't trust? Not me and not your employees. I'm telling you, team building events are painful when I see people like build a tower, build a team, like all of that kind of stuff. If you're lacking trust in your organization, they're not all of a sudden going to trust each other professionally because they can take spaghetti noodles and stick them together with marshmallows. I'm sorry, but it's just not going to happen. Also, annual surveys with no follow through. I've talked about this. Don't measure what you aren't going to actually act on. The fastest way to destroy trust is to ask people for their feedback and then not act on it. So, what are some ways to measure engagement without getting some kind of expensive software or, maybe working with a consultant or something like that? I would say there's 3-question pulse survey that you can do quarterly. That would be an excellent start. You can automate this in your HR payroll software. So that way it just automatically kicks out there, or you can do this manually through SurveyMonkey or what have you. But we want to ask, if you were going to do something basic, this is where I would start. 3 questions. Do you feel valued? Put it on a Likert scale, not a 3-point scale, a 5-point scale, so you can get the most actionable feedback. Number 2, do you have what you need to do your job? That's the second question. Number 3, which is also known as Net Promoter Score. The question is, would you recommend working here? Friend, family, colleague. That's what the Net Promoter Score is. That's on a scale of usually 1 to 10, but that'll help you know where your engagement is, because you want raving fans. You want your employees to be raving fans. So that is one way that you can measure engagement, is through a pretty simple 3-question pulse survey. That's a really great way to start if you're not doing it already. Second thing that you can do are stay interviews. I've talked about this in the past in previous episodes. I love a good stay interview. I talked about it on the metrics, the HR metrics episode, I believe was the last one. So you should go back and listen to that, what you should be measuring. Stay interviews are a great way to ask your people, why do you work here? Why do you stay? What keeps you around here? Ask your best people first. Before they even think about leaving, ask your best people, what made you want to work here and what makes you want to stay? And then while you're doing a stay interview, ask them what their barriers and obstacles are as well, and things that you can help them with. But stay interviews are excellent. That's the second way. Third, exit interviews. So many of you tell me that you don't want to do exit interviews because the person's already on their way out the door and they're not going to have anything helpful to say. I'm telling you, if you do exit interviews, you will find trend data that you can act on, even if it's just determining that it's a manager issue or a compensation issue or a clarity issue, whatever it is. Like, a theme will pop out. I'm telling you, there is going to be, data from disgruntled people, but you're also going to have good people who are leaving, who have helpful things to say. Get the data, plot the trends, throw the exit interview data into AI or whatever, ask it to help you identify trends, whatever that looks like. But do your exit interviews. Gosh dang. Do them in person if you can, do them remotely if you can't, do them in survey if you can't do the others. Surveys are going to be responded to less. And then the last way that I recommend to measure engagement without an expensive software are manager one-on-ones. If you're not doing these already, let me go ahead and preach to you, just like I have on a million other episodes. Managers, you need to be meeting with every single one of your direct reports at least once a month, and do not push those meetings. If you have it on the calendar and then you're known for shooting a message to your employee on Slack and saying, do you have anything for me this month? Because I don't really have anything pressing for you. No, we're not doing that. We're not pushing those meetings. We're having an agenda. We're going through the motions. Good things will come out of that. Okay, manager meetings. It helps us identify absentee patterns. You should be running that data in your HR payroll software too. Engagement signals from the monthly check-ins. Like, these are things that are going to come up. What's your workload looking like? What are your obstacles and barriers? What are we working on for next month? If you see them consistently missing focus or missing deadlines, we know that we've got an engagement issue. So do the pulse survey, stay interviews, exit interviews, manager one-on-ones. Those are great ways to measure engagement if you don't want to do a whole full-blown engagement and satisfaction survey, which I do recommend at least once a year. do the full thing, but I'm trying to talk about economical things right now. You cannot not have a culture. You have a culture right now. You have a culture. You just might not be naming it, whether you built it intentionally or whether you grew it by default. You've got a culture. The question is the culture the one that you want? And if it's not, you've got some work to do. There are 5 ways that you can strengthen your culture right now. You can name what you actually value, not aspirational things that you actually value. Responding to customer inquiries in 24 hours, whatever it looks like. I'm talking about behavioral ones. We give honest feedback when it's uncomfortable. That's a value that we want to honor. It's a value that you can act on. What do you actually value as an organization? If your value statements don't help you hire people, don't help you discipline people, don't help you manage performance, and don't clarify terminations, then your values aren't very good. So making sure that your values are not aspirational, it's the way you actually operate. Another is recognize a person very specifically. We've talked about SMART goals in the past, just making sure that you're being very clear when you're praising a person. So that way they know exactly what behavior that you're liking and that other people can see that as a model as well. Be very, very specific. Not great job, everyone. That's just not going to cut it. Another is address a behavior that you have been avoiding that contradicts your company values. And if you don't have company values, what is a behavior that you've been avoiding addressing that's causing problems in your organization? You can just say it like that. There is a behavior right now that one of your people is doing that is really making ripple effects in client satisfaction, in their team, productivity, whatever it looks like. Address it. Okay? Share something real with your team from yourself. This is the 4th thing that you can do right now to strengthen your culture. And I'm saying, like, what I would recommend is a business update. So many of us automatically assume that our employees know what goals we're trying to reach, know the purpose of our department, know why we exist, know where the business is going in the future, know why we're making decisions that we're making, know why we're integrating this technology, know why we're canceling this technology. We assume that our employees know that data, and most of the time they really don't. And I mentioned it earlier, in the absence of information, we're filling in the blanks, and usually it's with rumors or gossip or anxiety. So sharing a real business update is going to be very, very helpful. Transparency builds trust. I'm not saying you have to share what's spitting out at the bottom line, but there's plenty of things that you can share that would be helpful to them. And then that stay interview piece that I mentioned earlier, here's one question you could ask: what's keeping you here? What's keeping you here? What would make your work more meaningful is a follow-up question that you could ask to that. Then listen without being defensive. If you can't ask those questions without taking it personal, don't. But if you can't ask questions without being defensive, you need to determine if you should really be in a leadership role, because that's leadership. We need to be able to take that feedback from people. And you know what? If somebody says something mean to you, if you've got some reverse bullying going on from your employees to you, deal with it. That would be a behavior that you're not addressing, and that also tanks your culture. How can you make sure that you are including your culture in your hiring process? I just want to talk about a couple of these before we wrap, because we want to make sure that we attract people that actually fit. We need to be honest in job postings about what it's actually like to work here. We need to be very clear about that. We need to ask value-based interview questions. One of my most favorites is, tell me about a time where you disagreed with your manager or the direction of the company and what you did. That is a beautiful values-based question. Tell me about a time when you disagreed with a decision and what you did about it. So good. That's really, really helpful in the hiring process, because one, they have to admit that they disagree. We all disagree. They're going to disagree with you and your organization. So figure out how they handle those type of things, and then let candidates meet the team. I love doing a questionnaire. As you know, of course, they send in their resume, they do their application, whatever that looks like. If they hit minimum qualifications, I like to do a questionnaire that starts to include some values pieces. And then I like to do a phone interview, so that way we can make sure that they can communicate and kind of check that they're a legit person. And then when they come to do an interview, I like to do somewhat of a panel with a couple of team members as the next step. So that's a great way to integrate, like, how do we let them meet the team? I'm not saying let's go out to lunch. I'm saying in the interview process, like, include a couple teammates in the interview process. So also, in one other thing I want to mention, that's hiring, how we can integrate culture. How do we integrate culture in our offboarding? terminations, separations, the way you treat people on the way out, your employees are watching. I don't care if they like that person or not. They recognize the power that you hold and that you could treat them the exact same way, even if you're friends today. Even if you're friends today, they're watching how you're separating people and they're thinking, could be me. Because anytime somebody gets terminated or separates, it's a reminder to people that this is a place of work. We're not a family. We shouldn't talk about each other that way. We are an organization. I've seen companies call it a team. I've seen companies call it a village, whatever you want to call your organization and how you interact with each other, how you treat people on the way out the door, even if that employee has been a real jerk, the way you treat them will help people to know that are inside, if they ever choose to leave, that you'll treat them with kindness and respect too. It's a really great way to model your culture all the way to the end. It's really good. Culture is not an initiative and it's not a committee. It's how you show up day in and day out, even when it's hard. Get the decisions right and get them right consistently. And you are going to have an amazing culture that takes care of itself. When you have that clarity, when you've got the foundation built, when you're consistent, when you show up time and time again, even when it's hard, even when you disagree, even when there's conflict, even when you're getting feedback that you don't want to hear, and you handle that with grace and with love, like that's your culture. So here's what I want you to do for your action item. What's one behavior that you're tolerating right now that you know that you shouldn't be because it's hurting your culture, it's hurting other people? Address it. That's what I would recommend that you do this week. Don't forget, so I've already got my HR Foundations course out available right now with those foundational items, saltandlightadvisors.com/resources. I've got the operating system one out there as well, time and leave, compensation, performance management, that's out there. Same thing on the resources. And then the strategic items, which we're talking about today and have been talking about the last few episodes, those are going to be out in August of 2026. So depending on when you're listening to this episode, those will be live then on the website. That is coursework that you can do on your own if you don't want to work with me from a consulting perspective and you don't want to pick up the book, which you can find on Amazon. You can go do that coursework. And I've got 3 to 4 downloadable tools and resources that come along with every module. And inside the coursework, there's at least 4 modules. So we're averaging, around 12 downloadable tools, resources, templates, scripts, whatever it looks like you can apply in your business today. Those are very, very affordable. Those are under $100. You can pick up that coursework with tons of stuff that you can apply in your business today. So I highly recommend that. But then, of course, if you want to reach out and talk about consulting, I love starting out with an HR audit so I can take a look at your entire HR makeup, not a deep dive, an overview. And I can do a gap analysis and tell you what I would be doing in your organization of your size, in your location, in your state. And then you can decide, do you want to outsource some of that to me? Do you want to tackle it internally? I don't care. HR audit's a one-time thing, but most generally we end up in a consulting relationship after that, which I love. It's super fun because then I get to make an impact on your business, which really, really matters because it makes an impact on your people. It makes an impact on society as a whole. You as an employer, what you're doing really matters. I know it's hard. And I know leading people and knowing what to do. So many people say, I didn't get into, ownership so I can work in HR. I know that can feel like chaos, but this work is worth it. So don't waste the chaos. Embrace it, friends. I'll see you next week.